What if I told you that the Vikings had combined the bow with the spear into one weapon? Lars Andersen has dropped some new research. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now many of you will know exactly who Lars Andersen is. He's the very famous archer whose videos went viral many years ago, but he's been producing loads of videos ever since. Now he's dropped some new research. Now I should first up just mention that the video is currently unlisted because they're redoing some of the sound over, some of the speaking over the top of it and some of the audio. But he's dropped some new research looking at so-called Viking bows, we'll unpack that in a second, Viking longbows, which have a spear tip mounted on the end. So much like Lars, and probably like many of you as well, those of us who've looked at weapons like this over the years have kind of realised this is a long shaft, why not stick a spearhead on the end of it? And the immediate answer is because a typical spearhead would be too heavy, would affect the movement of the limbs of the bow, they'd make it unbalanced, it wouldn't work properly as a bow anymore. However, these archaeologically found examples have very small tips on them that are very light. So therefore, and according to Lars's tests, they don't actually affect the performance of the bow. So did the ancient Danes invent the bayonet? And if this was such a great invention, why wasn't it more universal? Why wasn't it used by different cultures over the world? Well, we're going to answer those questions in this video. But before I delve into that, I want to make it absolutely clear that I'm an admirer of what Lars Andersen is doing. I think he's got some amazing archery skills, obviously, and also he is delving into questions and topics around archery, which really other people haven't examined or even asked. And so it's absolutely great that he's publicising this discovery. Although he didn't make the discovery himself, he's kind of rediscovered it and he's publicising the idea that spear tips can be on bows. So not to disparage what he's doing at all, but we're going to question and challenge some of the assumptions made on this topic. So the absolute first thing to say is that yes, the Vikings and indeed people going all the way back into prehistory used things akin to this self longbow. It was the most common type of bow across Europe. But there's one fundamental fact we have to get out of the way here. The main discovery here is the Nidam or Nidam bog deposits from Denmark, which aren't Viking. Okay, so we can't just call something Viking just because it's from Denmark. These date to about 250 through to 400 AD. So really, they're Roman. In terms of history, in terms of periods, they are way pre-Viking. Viking era doesn't really start until the 700s. So it's hundreds of years before the Viking period. These are late Roman, so we could call them ancient. Of course, some people would say, well, maybe they were still around in the Viking period, and there is a claim that there has been a Sami bow with a spear tip mounted on it. I can't vouch for that, I haven't seen the evidence for that, so at the moment I don't have any evidence to say that. So these are ancient world or late Roman bows, not Viking. The next assertion I want to challenge is the idea that this was somehow unique to the people of ancient Denmark and that they invented this thing and no one else did it. Not really, okay? In fact, there are numerous different weapons which have had spikes and blades added to them throughout history. One of the most famous category of weapons are known to us in the modern arms and armour collecting world as combination weapons. And anybody watching this channel will know things like the combination weapons of things like guns, pistols mounted on swords, or battle axes in some cases, maces. Recently we were in the Pitt Rivers Museum and there Todd of Todd's Workshop and Todd Cutler with me, we were making videos, we saw a spear where the crossbar of the spear activated the pistol. So as well as stabbing the bore or whatever you're stabbing with the spear, the firearm goes off as well, is triggered by that. In addition to that, we have other missile weapons. We have things like, types of musket and arquebus, which have blades added to them, axe blades, spear blades, and even crossbows. We even have a crossbow sword combination weapon. Not to say these were ever widespread or were ever popular, but they did exist in other cultures at other times. And in fact, obviously, the bayonet on the rifle or musket is what most people will think of, and that obviously was a kind of world-beating combination, which was the most common weapon system throughout the late 17th, 18th, 19th, and into the 20th centuries and is still being used today. So obviously the bayonet on the rifle, hugely successful, but that in itself is not a new idea either, because we actually find spear blades added to blowpipes. So we actually find from Southeast Asia, for example, long blowpipes with spear blades mounted on them. And so those are true combination weapons. And who's to say how long they've been around for? And in fact, from England, we have a very famous example, a chap called William Need, who in the 1600s, around 1625, I seem to recall, petitioned the king. He had an idea, how can we have our pikemen also be useful for sending projectiles? And so he had them have a longbow and a pike, and in fact had them together and pivoting in such a way that they could hold their pike, operate their longbow, and then go back to being pikemen. So in fact, this idea of combining a spear with a bow was something which was actually probably quite prevalent at various times and experimented with, if not exactly successful. So Lars in his video shows how a person can shoot their bow and then immediately flip it round and use it as a spear. The question is, if that's such a genius idea, why wasn't it more prevalent? Why didn't more people, because basically all humans had access to bows and spears, why didn't more people throughout history, throughout the world, do this? Here are my main three reasons why I think it wasn't successful. So the first reason is, as I showed in a recent video talking about the effectiveness of spears and why they're so effective, stiffness. Okay, so one of the characteristics of spears is they are stiff. This enables them not only to give good penetration, but in addition to be able to use them nimbly. If you're using a spear and it has flex in it and it wobbles around a lot, although this can be a feature of certain martial arts, for example in wushu, generally speaking this isn't a desirable quality in a spear. Obviously the longer you make a spear the more flexible it gets, but generally speaking you want stiffness. The problem is a bow is inherently not stiff, it is flexible and it's already flexed. So fundamentally it doesn't make a particularly good thrusting weapon. And just to add to that, the nature of the spear tip that you have to have on these bows has to be small and light, and the ones that we see from Needham, for example, are cylindrical, at least the one that we can see. A spear tip generally isn't like that, and while you might have a ferrule on the back end which is like that, the main spear tip, generally speaking, has to have a blade and has to have some degree of size and rigidity and width to it, and you can't really fit that type of spearhead on a spear, so therefore even the tip isn't very effective. Okay, it might be effective enough against unarmoured people or people wearing minimum clothing, but against thick winter clothing or against any type of armour, that type of very small conical spearhead is not going to be very effective. The next reason why I think that spears made out of bows, or rather bows used as spears, didn't really take off was anybody who's used spears against people with other weapons, even people with other spears, will notice the spears get damaged. And here's the thing, if the opponents have knives, swords, axes, clubs, even other spears, when you're using your bow as a spear, they're going to be hitting against it, they're going to be damaging it. And anybody who knows about bows will know you only need a minimum amount of damage on a bow shaft, especially a wooden bow, but true of a composite bow as well, and it won't be useful as a bow anymore because it will start to break. So not only are they quite flimsy in themselves compared to an actual spear shaft, but they get damaged too easily. And of course the primary thing you want from a bow is to be able to shoot arrows from it. So if you can't do that anymore, you've essentially disarmed yourself of the bow. And that brings us to the third reason of why I think that it wasn't popular having a spear tip on a bow shaft, because it's really easy to carry something else. And it's generally speaking throughout history, throughout human history, anywhere in the world, so long as you can have something else, it could even be a spear, but it could be a sword, it could be a knife, it could be a club, an axe, whatever. So long as you can have something else, it means that you can use your bow as a missile weapon, immediately deploy your sword very quickly as you saw there, use your sword as a hand weapon, put it away again, and you've still got a functioning bow. And really anybody can do that, and any tribal society has access to bows, also has access to knives, axes, spears. So to wrap this up, I think it's absolutely wonderful research, and I for one am fascinated by the fact that these have been found in the Needham bogs. I've actually studied many of the weapons from Needham myself, and I didn't realise that those bows were there. So thank you to Lars for highlighting this. Watch out for Lars's video when it comes out, when it's been re-edited, because it's a really good video and I'm sure there'll be more research coming out of it, and I for one really am looking forward to that. I think it's really, really good. So not to belittle that at all. I just think that overall this wasn't, to answer the question in the video, why wasn't it more successful, why didn't more people do it? Because it just wasn't very effective. You can easily carry a bow and a spear, quite easily. You can even, you might think, well, you can't wear a spear. Well, you can easily stick it in the ground next to yourself, use your bow, and then immediately deploy the spear. So, and obviously wearing a sword, you can easily get that out in the blink of an eye. So really keeping your bow as a bow is overall throughout history has been more effective. And I think when we're looking archaeologically, as a former archaeologist myself, at the Nydam bows, perhaps these were people who didn't have access, couldn't afford hand weapons, or there was some other peculiar or particular reason why they wanted spikes on the end of their bows. But generally speaking, militarily, probably not a great choice. But thanks once again to Lars for highlighting this, and I really hope that the idea of spear bows becomes a little bit more well known. Thanks obviously to Lars, and maybe a little bit to my video here as well. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton. I will of course be again next time. See you back on the channel. Cheers folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks.